Leo, the floor is yours.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the talk and more importantly to the questions and discussions that we have towards the end of the presentation. So let's get right to it. I'm going to talk for maybe about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll try to leave some time for questions and discussion at the end. Over the last 9 months, I'd say, we have lived through some really bad times. We have seen hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives from COVID-19 in the US. We are undergoing right now some serious reckoning around racial injustice and what I call the disease of racism. At the same time, we are living through one of the most impressive economic downturns since the Great Depression, right? And if you're from the West Coast, you know, we're covered in ash and debris from the wildfires. So if somebody told you last year this was gonna happen, you would say, nah, that's the apocalypse, right? That's not gonna happen all at once. But here we are. And so my question to you is, how do you see this moment? Do you see this moment as an apocalypse, or is it an opportunity, right? And I choose to look at it as an opportunity, because I know we're gonna get beyond this point, and I wanna make sure that we come out on the other side better than we are now. So the truth be told though, we don't know what's gonna happen next year. Nobody knows what the world is gonna look like a year from now, this time next year. But we know two things for sure. Businesses will change. What direction they'll go to, we don't know. That's to be determined. The other thing I know that is a fact is that IT is going to be a driving force to support the business in whichever direction it decides to go. And let's underline that last phrase, because it's really difficult for IT to turn on a dime and to be able to follow a business that changes overnight. And so my sense here is that if IT is going to stand up to our mission to support the business, IT is going to have to be more flexible now than ever before in order to make this happen. And so I think it's a time for disruption. I think it's a time for all of our innovation and our creativity that we know that we have to come through right now to be able to take our businesses to where they want to go over the next year and beyond. It's time for a strategy. And one of the things I'm going to cover in this talk is how do we make it happen? How do we disrupt our organizations to move us to the next level and to get the organization to come along with us? All right, so today you're going to hear from several great panels. You're going to hear from technical and non-technical speakers. People are going to talk about remote access and cloud adoption and all these things. My talk is going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to focus on the technical aspects too much. I'm going to focus on how do we achieve buy-in from our organizations to be able to make the disruptive changes that we're talking about. My goal is that you will hear something in this talk that will give you an idea of how to achieve the success you're looking for to move your organization to the next level. And whatever cool things that you hear in this conference today are things that you're already thinking about. I'm hoping that this approach will give you something to take away to say, I could probably try this in my organization to introduce something new, all right? So key points that I'll be covering is that businesses will change. There is no if, ands, or but about that one. Businesses will change. In fact, it's already happening. IT needs to be flexible in order for us to go with the business, else we're gonna be left out in the cold. And I'm gonna introduce to you my approach that I use to move something through an organization, a new idea, new concept, new technology through an organization, and hope that's something you can resonate with for your organization as well. All right, so before we get on, just a little bit about me. As Ryan said, I'm Leo Howell, the Chief Information and Security Officer at University of Oregon. Been there for about 3 years now. My background over the last almost 20 years has been in higher education. I was at NC State before coming to the University of Oregon in many different roles in network security, in internal audits, and in security again. And so I kind of do back and forth over my career. By way of education, I'm a computer scientist and I guess electronics major as well. My MBA was from NC State University. And I like to spend my time on the visionary side of things. I like to sit down with blank pieces of paper, figure out what the environment is going to look like 5 years from now, and then try to position whatever I'm doing to meet those challenges. And just a shameless plug, on October 15th, we're going to be hosting the 3rd Oregon Cyber Resilience Summit at the University of Oregon, virtually, of course. That's a collaboration between myself and Department of Homeland Security, the Titan Fusion Center, and we should have some really good conversations there. So if that's something you're looking interested in, you can just do a Google search for Oregon Cyber Resilience Summit 2020, and registration is free. All right, enough about that. Quick word on the University of Oregon. For those of you who don't know, we are a Carnegie Mellon Research One university with about 23,000 students and about 7,000 employees. The university operates on about a $1.1 billion budget, and we have research revenues of about $126 million per year. Some really cool things that's happening on campus right now is we are, through the generous gift of Phil and Penny Night, we are standing up our night campus for accelerating scientific impact. It's a $1 billion initiative, very ambitious initiative. So if you drive by the Eugene campus, you will see this night campus building that's been erected, and research is going on right now. Two exciting upcoming events that you should know about is that the Olympic trials, the US Olympic trials, will take place in June 2021, COVID permitting, right? That should happen on the university campus. And in the World Athletics Championship is going to take place at Hayward Field in Eugene in 2022. Again, that's the first time this is going to be on a college campus, the first time it's going to be held in the United States of America. So we're excited about that. All right, so back to the presentation. The title of my little talk here is Get Off of Cruise Control. I think it's time for us to jump the cracks and chasms and get our organizations to the next level. Again, my 3 key points that I'll touch on are that businesses will change. IT has to become flexible in order to support that change. And finally, I'll show you my approach for how we get an organization through a change. So business change. I don't know what your organization is, but over the last 9 months, IT have done some things that they have never done before. We have shown our ability to deliver under pressure, to deliver fast. And I think it's an elastic effect. We're not going to go back to the way it was. The business now know the cat is out of the bag. The business now know that IT can deliver things fast, and they're going to hold us to that. They're not going to expect it's going to be as fast as we did because of the pandemic, but they're still going to expect that whatever change needs to be done, it can be done fast. Just some examples. We've implemented enough tools over the course of about 3 weeks that under normal circumstances would have taken us at least 6 months to a year to implement because our backs are up against the wall. I'm talking about things like expanding our VPN, adding Dropbox, adding Zoom, expanding Microsoft Teams. We had to set up telehealth for the first time for our health center and some others. Desktop as a service, all these things we had to do before the spring semester, the spring term started. And we managed to get through spring term, we managed to get through summer term, and fall is now in progress and things are looking good. So I'm excited for everything that we did. However, as I said, the business now expects that going forward, right? And it's not really sustainable. IT have learned over these 9 months how to be agile. IT has learned how to understand the concept of minimum viable product, the idea that we don't have to be perfect out the gate, but we can actually implement things that is 70% of where we want it to be and then add more things to it later on. And so that's a really good opportunity that came out of this. The other piece that I think is really important is that there is a there's sort of a newfound unity in organizations today. People are united around the COVID virus and how we can all deal with it together to keep our organizations running. And secondly, I think there's also unity around the whole racial reckoning and organizations looking to work together to figure out how to solve that problem. And in this unity, I think it's a good time to introduce disruptive, innovative approaches and technologies because everybody wants to talk to each other now. And so I think we can actually exploit that unity to upgrade some of the things that we always wanted to do, to adopt some of the technologies we always want to try to adopt before that window closes. So the other thing that is really changing for businesses is risk tolerance. So before COVID hit, obviously things like cybersecurity was really high risk. In our case at the University of Oregon, cybersecurity was in the top right-hand quadrant of our heat map from a cybersecurity risk, from a risk standpoint. And I'm talking about cybersecurity stacking up against things like sexual harassment and came out on top because the risk is really that high for the university. We haven't reassessed our risk post COVID, but I suspect that there's going to be other risks that make it to the top now because many organizations are thinking about existential threat more than just cybersecurity. And so we have to be careful there as security people. One other thing I noticed is that confidentiality was always the focus of cybersecurity. That's usually the biggest focus. And because of all this remote work and everything that's going on now, we learn really fast that we have to also include availability in the mix. And so I've instructed my security team, and a lot of my counterparts in other organizations have done the same thing. Basically instructed our staff to focus on availability. We can't have cybersecurity being a stumbling block in the way. We have to allow people to do things that they weren't doing before, understanding that the risk is increased, but it's a risk that we're willing to accept now because availability of services is more important right now than it used to be. So the last thing I'll say about the business change is that, especially the vendors that are on the call, you all know this more than I do. In these times of turmoil, there's gonna be lots of acquisitions. There's gonna be mergers and consolidations. And so the question I have for you is when this occurs, where will your IT shop or your security shop fare in those things? Depending on the level of maturity that you have, what's gonna happen to your shop when those mergers and acquisitions take place? So to wrap up this piece, again, IT have to continue to deliver the kind of support the business need, regardless of the direction that the business goes. We have to reassess our risk tolerance, understand the moment that we're in, and what I'd say, just don't sweat the small stuff anymore because the business cannot afford it. Cybersecurity has to elevate availability but in line with confidentiality as well. All right, so that's number one. Number two, IT has to become flexible to overcome the business uncertainty that we face right now. And by flexible, I mean, we have to make some assumptions that people are gonna wanna access computing services, systems and data from wherever they are. But I'll go further and I'll say they'll wanna access it from whatever they have. And so this means our organizations are gonna have to grapple with things like, do we assign everybody a laptop? Do we assign people hotspots for those people who live in areas where internet connection is not as good? Do we need to do that? And those were some of the things we had to do at the University of Oregon during the pandemic. We had to order lots of laptops and Chromebooks and loan them to students and to staff in some cases. We had to buy lots of hotspots and give those out to people so that they could get equal access to the systems and services that were not remote, right? What I'm calling use your own device, or UYOD, I think is gonna become prominent going forward, where we have to set up our systems and our security such that if people are logging in from their own devices, the risk is still low. And that means increasing our server-side controls for security as opposed to pushing too much security out at the endpoint where systems are. I think IT is gonna have to learn how to deliver services faster. than we did before. And in order to do that, I think we have to develop this mindset of building everything as a service. We already know 50 to 60% of what the organization needs. Before somebody comes and tells you that, hey, I need this particular service, we already know a piece of what they need. Number one, they need access to systems and data on demand. That's just a given. So why don't we already set up that process in place so that people can get access to systems and data on demand? And so we don't have to worry about that when they ask for the next thing. In order to do this flexibility, we have to understand that there is no security perimeter anymore. The traditional security perimeter have been obliterated. So we have to focus on things now like secure access service edge. How do we ensure that people can get the access from wherever, whenever, with whatever they have, and still maintain some amount of security, right? Those are the things that we're gonna have to grapple with. And then finally, we have to grapple with how standard is our IT delivery, how mature is our IT team, and what is gonna happen to that team when the mergers come, or what's gonna happen to that team when the discussions come up about cutting things in the organization, right? So those are the things that I'm concerned about. I think it's time to adopt more of the cloud. This is my personal preference, right? I think it's time to adopt more cloud services. Most organizations are pretty good at adopting software as a service, but they're not so fast on pulling the trigger on things like infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. I think I know why. I know one of the reasons anyway. One of the reasons is that I think IT staff is not very quick to adopt things like infrastructure and platform as a service. Because what does that mean? That means the stuff that you have been cruising on for many years, if you're a 10-year IT administrator, you have set up lots of scripts and you have automated your work and you know what's going on and you come into work and things kind of just get done by itself. Now, in order to switch to lift that up and move to a cloud platform or anything like that, it's going to take a lot of work and time. And so I think there is a lot of fear of the unknown from our IT counterparts. I think there's also a fear of irrelevance because people understand that if they switch to the cloud, they may have to retool themselves in terms of how they do system administration and support. And so one of the hurdles that we're going to have to overcome is to quickly train IT staff to understand how to provision services in the cloud. Once we get rid of that unknown piece of it through training, I think it becomes easier for people to make the switch as opposed to hanging on right now for dear life to the old way of doing things. All right, platform and infrastructure, as you know, is a lot of work. It's complex. It's something that took years to build. And so even small changes in an application could result in major, small changes in infrastructure could have major consequences. And that's why for me, if we can cross over to that other side where we adopt platform as a service and infrastructure as a service for our organizations, it's going to become much easier for us to become as flexible as I think IT needs to be moving forward. IT funding has to change though. If we're going to be that flexible in IT, we have to understand that the current model doesn't work. The model at my institution is more of a CapEx heavy model where it's easy to get one-time dollars, but it's really hard to get recurring dollars. And so we're going to have to figure out in our organizations, how do we change the funding model for IT so it's more OpEx heavy as opposed to CapEx heavy? Because if we're going to adopt things like cloud services, we know it's a subscription service, and therefore we're going to have those talks with the CFO about how do we change the way we fund IT. And I don't know what that means. It could mean you need to have an IT bank, or it could mean they just totally start shifting to recurring funding, but we're going to have to figure that out to be able to become as flexible as I think we need to be. My challenge to two groups of people right now around IT flexibility. First, to the private organizations, I think we need to maximize whatever we have now. If you look across any IT organization, you're going to find people using probably 50% of all the capabilities that we have. And so I'd say maximize the capabilities you have now because it's major economic downturn and there's not going to be a lot of money to give us what we need. But then I'll also say to the vendors, the people who are selling us things, my personal preference is that vendors modularize some of the things that they're selling. I don't want to buy the entire kit and caboodle here. I want to buy what I really need. And so if I have to spend $1 million for something where I need $300,000 of features, I'd rather pay $300,000. So the more modular the vendors can make their products, I think it's going to be better for folks going forward. Again, it ties into that whole theme of flexibility here. So I should be able to mix and match different things as I move forward. So just to kind of sum up this piece, users need access anytime, anywhere. And I think we have to embrace the concept of UIOD, use your own device. We're going to have to lower the service delivery time and embrace IT as a service. As a matter of fact, I'd say embrace everything as a service in using that model. I think it's time to have bigger adoption of infrastructure and platform as a service. And we're going to have to really shift our funding model from a purely CapEx heavy to more of an OpEx heavy type of model. So this is all well and good. These are kind of things that are easy to say. But the question then is, how do I become innovative and disruptive? How do I get that kind of flexibility that we're looking for? And I'm glad you asked that question if you're thinking about it, because I think there's an answer, and I'm going to share with you now what I believe is a way to get this done. For many years, the technology vendors have been using the technology adoption lifecycle. If you all know what that is, I'll show you a picture in a few minutes, to bring really disruptive technologies to mainstream market. And if you look at companies like Tesla, who basically currently disrupting the automobile industry, you look at Uber and Lyft and what they're doing, companies like Dropbox, Apple, Netflix. You know, you could ask the question, whatever happened to that other company that used to rent Blockbuster, right? What happened to them? You look at Amazon and what they're doing to retail. So there is lots of disruption going on, and there's a way that these vendors are trained to bring things to mainstream market. I think we can use the same strategy within our organizations, especially if we're thinking about moving to a post-COVID world. I think there's a way for us to bring disruptive and innovative ideas and technologies to our organization and be able to move across the organization to get full buy-in from our stakeholders. In order for us to do this, there's a way to do it, a certain ordering of your steps that I'm going to discuss, and hopefully that will make sense for folks. So I have a recommended reading for folks. There's a book called Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. It's a bestseller. It's really used a lot by people looking to introduce disruptive technology. So if you haven't read that book yet, I'd recommend it for you. In order for us to make radical changes in an organization, especially in an organization as big as mine, where we have 23,000 students and 7,000 faculty and staff, you have to understand the various stakeholder groups, and you have to understand what makes them tick and how to get them across those barriers, right? So give me a minute to share my screen here. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Somebody just tell me when you can see my screen.
You are good to go.
Perfect, thank you. So according to what Jeffrey Moore wrote, there are, every organization have about 5 types of users, right? Or every market have about 5 types of users. So I'm going to use market and organization interchangeably here. This is normally used for bringing a product to mainstream market. And my suggestion here is that this can actually work for bringing a product to mainstream within an organization as well, right? So every organization have these 5 types of groups. And the idea here is to kind of make them all happy if we're going to achieve full implementation of a product in an organization. As we go through this discussion, I'm going to talk specifically about desktop as a service, because that is something I'm trying to do now at the University of Oregon to actually get us to mainstream within the organization. So if you look at our first group of people on the left-hand side of this screen, our techies, our innovators, these are the people who are usually more technical. They are willing to try new things. If you will, they are probably the geeks among us, right? Oh yeah, that's cool. Let's give it a try. See what happens. So you're going to introduce something like desktop as a service to an organization. I think the first place to start here is you identify a small group of technologists that can become fluent in this technology, understand what you're trying to do, and get them to be excited about that technology. And that's what we've done as it relates to the desktop as a service at the University of Oregon. We have a core group of technologists who are excited about offering desktop as a service, either through something like VDI, or some of you are familiar with Citrix and those kinds of technologies. So you get that group excited, you get them to work on the thing and show that there is something that's working, and it's proven, right? It's a workable solution. That's easy. That's your easy group. 2.5 to 3% of your organization is going to be that way. The second group that we're going to have to take a look at now is what we call the early adopters. These people are your visionaries in the organization. They understand what the company is and where it's going, or what is possible for the organization. And so they're willing to try something if it's going to become a competitive advantage for the organization. You know, typically these could be your marketing people, or folks who are like, oh yeah, this is cool. If we did this, our bottom line is gonna improve. So they are the visionaries. And you know, it's still a small population. You're looking at 13, 14% of the population. The other thing about this group, these early adopters, is that they're willing to try things even if it's not fully technically baked yet. So they're willing to have a few errors and click through a few things to get the kind of access they need, as long as they can see that it will work, all right? So you get that group and you're happy. We've had, you know, 15% of the organization, let's say, enthusiastic about your idea here. Then comes trouble. Trouble is our early majority. This is 34% of an organization, right, or of a market. And what we're trying to do here is to convince these people that this is a good thing to do. But these folks are pragmatists, right? They don't just jump very easily to do anything. They say, you know what, I think this may be another fad. I don't want to just go for it. They want to know things like, who else is using this thing? How do we know it's going to work in this organization? But the funny thing about that question they're asking about who else is using it, they specifically mean who else among the early majority group is actually using this thing. So here comes sort of a catch-22. You don't have anybody in the group yet, in the early majority group, that's adopted your desktop as a service, but they want references from other early majority folks. And so that's where it becomes really difficult. And that's why Jeffrey Moore thinks there's a chasm between getting from early adopters to the pragmatists. And oftentimes when a company get across that chasm, it's going to be successful, all right? And so the trick here is to find a way to get across the chasm. But the truth be told, most ideas, most products, most services are going to die before it gets across that chasm, because the early majority are really hard to convince. For the vendors among us, usually when you come to us with something new and innovative, one of the first questions we'll ask is, which of the universities using this? And if you tell us the university, then we call them up and we say, are you really using this? And how is it working for you? Because we're sort of a herd. We're in that herd mentalities. I'm not going to trust it until I hear somebody else in my space that is using it. So we'll come back a little bit to some ideas for how to get across that chasm into pragmatist land. So we move on to the next group, which is the late majority. And if you think the early majority was tough, the late majority is even tougher. These are conservative folks. These are not in the political sense, conservative in the sense of not wanting to try anything. They don't want to rock the boat. They say, it's working, why are we trying to fix it? Again, this is another 34% of your population. Now, the major mistake that organizations can make is addressing the wrong group at the wrong time. Imagine if you started with this desktop as a service concept and the first group of people that we go talk to sell this idea are your conservatives. It's probably going to be dead on arrival because they don't like change. And if it's dead on arrival, you have 34% of people potentially deciding that that idea is bad. Do you think it's going to go forward if 34% of people are already thinking it's a bad idea? And so it's important to really follow this model from left to right as opposed to jumping into the wrong place. Now, your group that is the last one up here are skeptics, are laggards. These people are always, 99% of the time, they'll say no to something that's new. They don't want to change. In fact, most times they will never change until you basically got rid of the old technology or the old approach. And so it makes sense then to sort of market to everybody and not worry too much about the laggards until you get to the end, because they're going to say no anyway. The biggest single mistake somebody can make is to actually start with the laggards and think they're going to get somewhere. So that's sort of a picture of what that looks like. So let's talk about how do we cross the chasm or the cracks. As you notice, this technology life cycle have the cracks in it. Look at between the innovators and early adopters, there's a crack. Why is there a crack? Because it's two different groups of users, right? It's not like an easy flow from innovators to early adopters. There's work to be done to get there. You know, at the University of Oregon, we've taken certain advantages of now that COVID is up on us and all those things. It was kind of easy for us to get to early adopters because their backs are up against the wall. So that was the easy way to get in there. The second crack to really speak about is between the pragmatists and the conservatives. And you have to understand that the early majority pragmatist group, they're okay with using something that is not fully baked. It's pretty close to being fully baked, but it's not there yet, as long as they have reference within that group. The conservatives, however, they want an easy button, right? If they're ever going to adopt this thing, they're not willing to work out any kinks or anything like that. So this is an era where you're going to have lots of training and stuff to get those people to adopt what we're looking at. So that's sort of a general breakdown of how the 5 groups work in an organization or in any market. So what I'm going to talk about in the next minute or two is how do we cross that chasm? How do we get across that dreadful chasm right there? And the big idea here is, again, remember there's a catch-22. They need a reference before they will agree, but there is no reference. So how do you get the first references? And the way to look at this is you kind of think about it like it's war, right? Think about it like it's D-Day and try to figure out what is going to be my beachhead with this thing. How do I get the first win? And so an idea here is to start with a niche, find one application or one service like desktop as a service or something like that, and find any reason for them to want to do this. Any reason at all for your early majority to want to try this service. In this case for us, it's the pandemic. Their backs are against the wall. People need to do telemedicine. People need to do secure research. And so that was my in to say, okay, let's try this service. And now that we have people actually trying this service, now we have references. So as we move to try to expand desktop as a service, there's going to be more people willing to take this up and move forward. So it's an interesting game to play. If we understand this and we move from left to right, there's a good chance of being successful. But the chasm is the place to watch out for. How do you get from the visionaries to your early majority? One of the problem that the early majority have with visionaries is if you think about who the visionaries are in the organization, these are the high-paid people a lot of times, not always. These are the people who don't stick around forever. These are the people who come to an organization in 3-5 years, they're gone. And so there's a little bit of resentment as well from the people in the pragmatist and conservative group that says, yeah, I've seen this stuff before. We're not going to jump on this because you're going to be gone in 3 years. So those are some of the things that create that chasm as well. So just sort of summing up this piece here. All businesses have innovators, the techies, right? Every business do. They have their early adopters, the pragmatists, the late majority conservatives, and then the laggard skeptics. This is a marketing game. So if we figure out how to tailor our message and tailor our benefits to the various groups and then walk through this thing from left to right, we're going to be in good shape to be able to do this. To cross the chasm, it's really about finding a beachhead, start with a niche area, and then see if we can coax people to get across to the other side on this thing. So let's wrap this up. Again, I want to go back to where we started. This can be an apocalypse if you're thinking glass half empty, or this can be a significant opportunity for us to move forward. there is not one IT person that's sort of worth their salt who don't have creative ideas for how to move a business forward. And people just weren't listening to you because everything was normal. Things are not normal anymore. This is a time for us to bring our disruptive ideas, our innovative thinking to the organization. And this is an approach that will help you to deliver that idea across the organization. It's going to take time. You're going to have to understand who your innovators are. You also have to understand that innovators are not the same for every initiative or every project. So you have to understand who those people are. You have to understand who the early adopters are, understand every group and tailor your conversation, your marketing, your benefits to those people. Provide training where training is necessary, because if you're going to get IT to adopt cloud services, for example, it starts with training. It starts with getting IT comfortable that, oh, I understand this technology, and that fear of irrelevance goes away. And then suddenly people are excited about this new cool way of doing things. So, you know, the businesses will change in a number of ways. We don't know exactly how they're going to change. And that's why it is highly important that IT is as flexible can be, so that we can support the business in whichever direction it decides to go. And so we have to get in the mindset of everything as a service, understand that we have to do UIOD, understand that we have to be able to turn on a dime in case the business decides to move in a different direction. You know, if you worked at Kodak, you'll be making cameras in 1 year, and the next year you're looking to get into the healthcare industry. And I think those are the kinds of weird changes that we're gonna see post-COVID, and we have to be ready to deal with those things. The funding model is gonna be significantly important. IT CFOs in these companies have to realize that IT is fast becoming more of an OpEx than a CapEx type of investment. And so we have to figure out how to shift things around to do this. I've shown it my approach for jumping the chasm here. It's not always something that's gonna work, but I think it's something that's worth a try. You really have to find a beachhead and capture that. You have to figure out how do you get some references built up in the early majority group, because they need reference among the herd, right? And the idea here is to identify specific applications, specific services, try to get that to work, and then you move on to the next thing. So with that, I'll sort of wrap it up and said this was an exciting time for me to talk to you all. And I'll just pause there and see if people have questions, comments, or further things we can talk about.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, we have over 100 people in this session and only one question. So while I ask this question for the attendees, please do feel free to ask any other questions through the Q&A functionality. We talked about, you know, the rising curve and adopters and innovators, and you oversee a large team yourself. The question is, how do we help the people below us as IT administrators become more of those visionaries and take advantage of the technology that's out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think my approach is a little bit different. I will share the vision with people, but I think there's a natural tendency for people to sort of act in a more of a visionary way versus a techie kind of approach. And so what I try to do instead is to find the visionaries instead of trying to make them, because I think we have some people who naturally are just that way. I'll give you an example, right? I have this crazy thing that I'm trying to do right now. As you know, I'm a security guy. So every time I talk about data analytics and things like that, I'm thinking about how do I make decisions for cybersecurity? How do I know when something needs to be looked at to see if there's an incident going on? And so we were busy setting up our SIEM and our data analytics platform for cybersecurity. And then it occurred to me, the university is also trying to embrace this idea of data-driven decision-making. And so I said, you know what, data is data. It's the same thing. Why don't we bring the security people together with all the other folks that's doing data analytics, create one big data lake, and then make decisions against that for whatever we want to do, whether it's cybersecurity or it's student success or some other question that we're trying to answer. And I knew that I needed some visionaries, right? I knew that I needed some techies that were gonna be excited about this. And so that's what I did. I went out and searched for people not within my team. The people in my team are easy. They, you know, we can talk about what we're going to work on and they'll jump to it. But this is about going out and influencing others across the organization. Identify those people who are excited about data analytics. And just to give you an example, the people that are currently on the team for me are from all over the university. There's a guy from athletics. There's a guy from within the information services unit. There's somebody from the student success group, from institutional research. These are all people that had a vision of what data analytics need to look like for the university. And so we bring them together and are running this initiative now that's called Data as a Service, where we're gonna connect people to data on demand to be able to make data-driven decisions. So I don't try to talk people into becoming one of these buckets, whether it's a visionary, a techie, early majority, or so on. I just go find them. And again, remember, it's different for different people. If I'm rolling out an ERP system, my pragmatists and conservatives are going to be different people than if I'm rolling out a desktop as a service. So that's what I do. I search for these people instead of trying to create them in a sense.
Sure. And I do want to leave time for our attendees to visit the exhibit hall before our next session begins in 15 minutes. But real quickly, another question that came in that I think is pretty valuable. What communication strategy have you found to be most effective when introducing new services to end users? We tend to feel that users overlook emails from IT and marketing, by the way, but go ahead.
It's different for different groups. So, right, my working in a university is a really good place to answer that question from, because I have multi-generational and just different groups of users. The faculty, I don't know if faculty read email. Students, and I have a couple of students in my house as well, they just don't read email, right? But your traditional administrative people, they read email every day. And so, the communication method that we use is sort of an all of the above strategy. For example, I just finished implementing two-factor authentication and we needed to get the word out to people to do some things. And we had to use email. We had to use the university alert system, which is a text messaging system. We can only send 140 characters and get them to go read something else somewhere. We had to use the local IT groups to communicate locally with their folks. And at the same time, we have websites set up. So on a university campus, you have to do an all of the above type of strategy, because the truth be told is that the students really don't really read emails anymore. The other thing that we have is we have a university app that most students use. And that's another place that we look to communicate things that's important for folks to hear. But it's got to be a comprehensive all of the above strategy, because the question is right. We don't